The judge's gavel hasn't fallen yet, but Alvin Thice is already sweating through his collar. His attorney keeps whispering, urgent, panicked. The gallery is packed with journalists who lean forward in their seats like vultures circling fresh meat, cameras ready, notepads open. Then the words drop. Asset freeze. Immediate effect. Pending investigation into fraud, embezzlement, and marital misconduct. Alvin's face drains white. His hands grip the table edge. His knuckles go pale. Someone in the back row mutters it loud enough for everyone to hear. The marriage was never legally over. Wait. What? The courtroom erupts. Cameras flash. Reporters scramble for their phones. But we need to rewind. 6 months earlier. Carmela Trudeau's casket sits open in a Palo Alto funeral chapel. The room smells like lilies and floor polish and something else. Something stale. Something wrong. Dolores stands barefoot on cold marble, watching her husband whisper into his phone near the viewing area. He hasn't touched her once. Not her hand. Not her shoulder. Not even eye contact. His voice is low but sharp, impatient, like someone closing a deal at a funeral. His wife's mother's funeral. Sarah Whitmore, Dolores's best friend since college, maid of honor at her wedding, godmother to the children they never had, touches Alvin's arm softly. He nods. She glances at Dolores with something that might be sympathy, or might not. Dolores doesn't cry. She doesn't scream. She just watches. Because something is wrong. The way Alvin's jaw tightens when he sees her looking. The way Sarah's hand lingers too long on his sleeve. The way no one meets her eyes. Something is very, very wrong. What none of them know, what no one in that chapel could possibly guess, is that the woman in the coffin controlled more wealth than most nations. Carmela Trudeau wasn't poor. She wasn't comfortable. She was unfathomably, invisibly, devastatingly powerful. And she had prepared for this exact moment. She knew betrayal was coming. She'd seen it forming long before Dolores did. She'd watched Alvin's eyes change, watched Sarah's visits increase, watched the marriage hollow out from the inside. And she'd built a trap. Betrayal doesn't announce itself. Subscribe before you miss the signs. If you've ever trusted someone who smiled while they destroyed you, you already know. The worst betrayals don't come from strangers. They come from the people standing right beside you. And the worst betrayal hadn't happened yet. Dolores grew up believing her mother was ordinary. Carmela Trudeau lived in a small Northern California home with aging furniture and muted paint. She drove a sedan that rattled when it hit 45. She wore clothes that didn't stand out. Grays, beiges, soft blues that blended into backgrounds. No social media. No charity galas. No designer anything. She never mentioned Dolores's father. Never talked about ambition or power or money. She only said one thing that mattered. The night before Dolores married Alvin, Carmela sat her down in the kitchen. The same kitchen where they'd eaten cereal for dinner more times than Dolores could count. The same chipped tile. The same fluorescent light that flickered. Carmela looked at her daughter with an expression Dolores couldn't read. Love doesn't protect you. Preparation does. Dolores laughed it off. She thought her mother was being paranoid, overprotective, maybe even bitter about a past Dolores would never know. She married Alvin anyway. What Dolores never understood, what she couldn't have understood, was that Carmela wasn't giving advice. She was giving instructions. For decades, Carmela had built an empire so carefully hidden that even federal agencies failed to trace it. Shell corporations nested inside holding companies, blind trusts layered beneath offshore accounts, international properties registered under names that didn't exist. She designed her silence with surgical precision. Every dollar moved quietly, every transaction buried, every asset invisible. Because silence hides predators. And Carmela knew exactly what kind of predator Alvin Theiss was. She saw it the first time he visited. The way his eyes scanned the house, cataloging, assessing. The way he asked questions that seemed casual but weren't. Where did you grow up, Carmela? Did you always live here? Do you have family overseas? He wasn't making conversation. He was hunting. Carmela smiled, served tea, gave answers that sounded complete but revealed nothing. And she began planning. 17 clauses. 17 safeguards embedded in a will that wouldn't surface until after her death. Each one designed to protect Dolores from a threat Carmela knew was coming. Because mothers don't just raise daughters. The smart ones arm them. We've all trusted someone who didn't deserve it. The question isn't whether they fooled us. It's whether we saw it coming and ignored the signs. Carmela didn't ignore anything. She watched. She documented. She prepared. And when she died, she left Dolores more than money. She left her a weapon. Carmela wasn't preparing Dolores for marriage. She was preparing her for war. 2 days after the funeral, Alvin sat Dolores down at the kitchen table. His voice was calm, controlled, almost clinical. I think grief has destabilized you. Dolores stared at him. I just buried my mother. That's exactly why, he said. You need distance, professional help, space to process. He had already made arrangements, a private wellness retreat in Vermont. Remote, isolated, limited contact with the outside world. Specialists trained in grief counseling and trauma recovery. It sounded reasonable. It sounded caring. It was neither. Sarah sat beside Dolores, nodding sympathetically. She reached across the table and squeezed Dolores's hand. It's temporary, Sarah said. Just time to heal. Time to find yourself again. Sarah, who had held Dolores through her first breakup, who had helped her pick out her wedding dress, who had promised to always be there. Dolores wanted to argue. She wanted to say no. But grief makes you doubt yourself. Grief makes you think maybe everyone else sees something you don't. So she agreed. The retreat wasn't therapy. It was erasure. Phones confiscated at intake. Emails monitored for triggering content. Letters screened before delivery. Sessions that felt less like healing and more like interrogation. Do you struggle making decisions without your husband? Would you say you rely on others for emotional stability? Do you feel unsafe when you're alone? Stop. Read those questions again. These weren't therapy questions. They were custody questions. They were building a case. Dolores answered honestly because she thought honesty was safe. She talked about missing Carmela, about feeling unmoored, about not knowing what came next. Every word was documented, every hesitation noted, every tear cataloged as evidence of instability. Weeks blurred into each other, then months. The facility had windows but no views, just trees that all looked the same. Days followed identical patterns. Breakfast at 7, group session at 9, individual therapy at 11, lunch, another session, dinner, lights out. Dolores stopped asking when she could leave, because every time she asked, the answer was the same: when you're ready. But who decided when she was ready? Not her. Would you have gone? Or would you have fought back the moment he suggested it? Comment below. We want to know if you'd see the trap before it closed. While Dolores was being helped, her life was being erased. Bank accounts she couldn't access. Property she couldn't check on. A marriage that was being quietly dismantled while she sat in group therapy circles talking about her feelings. And then the letter arrived. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Not handwritten, not personal. Legal. Alvin Theiss had filed for separation. The petition cited emotional instability, inability to function independently, a danger to herself and potentially others. It recommended continued supervised care and a formal psychological evaluation before any custody of joint assets could be restored. Joint assets. As if Dolores were a child. The papers were already stamped, already processed, already moving through the system. Dolores read them twice in the staff lounge while a counselor watched her face for signs of breakdown. The counselor had a clipboard. She was taking notes. Dolores didn't break down. She folded the papers neatly and handed them back. "When can I make a phone call?" The counselor hesitated. "We'll need to discuss that with your care team." That's when Dolores understood. This wasn't a retreat. It was a cage, and Alvin had the key. Back in California, Alvin was moving fast. Bank accounts, frozen, then transferred under claims of financial guardianship. Property titles, shifted into trusts that listed him as primary beneficiary. Investment portfolios, restructured under the justification of protecting assets during a period of mental health crisis. Everything that had Dolores's name attached was being quietly moved, restructured, or locked away. His attorney worked efficiently. Documents filed at odd hours. Signatures obtained through electronic authorization that Dolores never approved. Court dates scheduled and rescheduled to minimize scrutiny. Sarah had moved into the house, not as a guest, as a replacement. Her clothes in the closet, her coffee mug on the counter, her car in the driveway where Dolores's used to be. They didn't hide it. Why would they? Dolores was gone, unstable, institutionalized. A problem that had been solved. Neighbors who asked were told the same story. She needed help. We're doing what's best for her. It's temporary. No one questioned it. Because people don't question a man taking care of his sick wife. They applaud him. Most people never see betrayal like this coming. They think trust is enough. But trust without awareness is just blindness wearing a pretty name. Then something shifted. A stranger walked into the retreat on a Thursday afternoon. Tall, graying, wearing a suit that didn't belong in a wellness facility. He asked for Dolores by name. The staff tried to redirect him, tried to explain that residents weren't available for unscheduled visits, that all contact had to be pre-approved by family or legal guardians. He smiled. Then he handed them a court order, and everything broke open. The man introduced himself as Richard Ludwig, attorney, estate executor, representative of Carmela Trudeau's legal interests. "I represented your mother," he said quietly. Dolores almost laughed. She didn't have money for a lawyer. Richard slid a folder across the table. Inside was a will. Then another document. Then another. Pages and pages of legal text, asset schedules, corporate registrations, trust formations. Dolores read the numbers once, then twice, then a third time because surely she was misreading. Her hands started shaking. Billions. Not millions. Billions compounding into trillions. Holdings in 17 countries. Shell corporations controlling energy infrastructure, pharmaceutical patents, real estate portfolios that spanned continents. Assets positioned so deeply in legal gray zones that most governments didn't even know they existed. Carmela Trudeau hadn't left her daughter a nest egg. She had left her an empire. And one clause stood out. Clause 9. Spousal exclusion period. No spouse, former spouse, or individual connected by marriage may access, challenge, or claim any portion of the estate during a 6-month verification window following the decedent's death. Any attempt to do so will trigger automatic legal action and asset protection protocols. Carmela had anticipated betrayal. She knew, Dolores whispered. Richard nodded. She planned for it. Then he said the sentence that changed everything. Your husband has been searching for these assets since before the funeral. He retained a forensic accountant 2 weeks before your mother died. Wait. Before? Before Carmela died? Dolores felt something cold settle in her chest. How did he know to look? Richard's expression didn't change. That's the question, isn't it? The room went quiet. Alvin hadn't stumbled into this. He hadn't filed for separation out of concern or grief or confusion. He'd been planning, hunting, waiting. And the moment Carmela died, he moved. Only he didn't know about Clause 9. He didn't know about the verification window. He didn't know that every financial move he made while Dolores was locked away was being documented, analyzed, and compiled into a case that would destroy him. Subscribe now, because secrets like this rewrite everything. If you're not subscribed yet, comment why. We want to know what's stopping you. Richard stood. I'll be in touch. Don't contact your husband. Don't leave the facility yet. Let him keep digging. Why? Because the deeper he digs, the more evidence we collect. And then Richard left. Dolores sat alone in the conference room, staring at papers that proved her mother had lived a life she never understood. Carmela hadn't been ordinary. She'd been extraordinary. And she'd loved her daughter enough to prepare for the worst, even when it meant Dolores would have to survive the worst first. Alvin had already been searching, but he had no idea what he'd just activated. 3 months after filing separation papers, Alvin proposed to Sarah at a charity gala. Flashbulbs, champagne, applause from a crowd that didn't know his wife was still alive, just disappeared. Sarah wore white. Not cream, not ivory. White. Like a bride. The photos went up on social media within minutes. Smiling faces, linked arms. A future being built on top of someone else's grave. Someone tagged the location. The Ritz-Carlton, San Francisco. Someone else commented. Finally seeing you happy again. Again. As if Dolores had died. As if she'd never existed. Dolores saw the images on a shared screen at the retreat. A staff member tried to turn it off, tried to redirect her attention. But Dolores didn't look away. She didn't cry. She smiled. Because Alvin didn't know something critical. The divorce was never finalized. Dolores had never signed the papers. She'd folded them neatly and handed them back to the counselor. The staff had filed them away, assuming she'd eventually comply, assuming grief and time would wear her down. But she hadn't signed. And under California law, that meant one very simple thing. Alvin and Dolores were still married. Every financial move Alvin made while assuming separation? Illegal. Every asset transfer? Subject to scrutiny under marital property law. Every promise he made to Sarah? Legally worthless. Every public appearance? Evidence. The engagement photos weren't just tasteless. They were Exhibit A. Dolores saved the photos, forwarded them to Richard Ludwig with a single line. "He's getting comfortable." Richard replied within minutes. "Good. Let him." Alvin was building his new life in public, introducing Sarah as his fiancée, talking about fresh starts and moving forward. He appeared on a local podcast discussing men's mental health and the importance of recognizing when a relationship becomes toxic. He spoke with practiced empathy about how hard it was to watch someone you love spiral, how sometimes the kindest thing you can do is create distance. The comments praised him. Such strength, such courage, such compassion. No one asked where his wife was. No one questioned the timeline. Because Alvin had always been good at controlling narratives, at shaping perception, at making himself the hero of every story. Was Sarah evil or just opportunistic? Comment below. And if you still won't subscribe, tell us why. What's holding you back? But there was something Alvin didn't understand about narratives. They only work until someone introduces evidence. And Dolores had 6 months of evidence. Every blocked phone call, every intercepted email, every therapy session where she'd asked to leave and been told she wasn't ready. Every financial transaction Alvin made while she was locked away. Every public appearance with Sarah. Every interview where he played the grieving, burdened husband. Richard Ludwig was building a file, and it was devastating. What Alvin didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that the clock was ticking down. The 6-month verification window was almost over, and when it closed, everything would change. Dolores didn't rush back to California. She stayed invisible. She learned. Richard Ludwig sent her materials, case files on marital fraud, corporate law statutes, trust protection precedents, asset tracing methodologies. She studied them the way someone studies a language they need to survive in. Late into the night, reading by the desk lamp in her room at the facility, highlighting sections, taking notes, asking Richard questions that became increasingly sophisticated. What constitutes fraud versus misrepresentation? How do you prove intent? What evidence is admissible versus circumstantial? The staff noticed the change but misunderstood it. They thought she was healing, engaging, finding purpose. They had no idea she was sharpening a blade. While Alvin leveraged debt against properties he thought he controlled, while he transferred holdings into corporate structures he believed were untouchable, while he flaunted a future he was certain was guaranteed, Dolores waited. Patience isn't weakness. It's strategy. It's the difference between reacting and responding, between emotion and execution. Alvin exposed himself with every move, every asset shuffle, every public appearance with Sarah, every interview where he positioned himself as the victim of circumstance. He built his own case against himself, and he had no idea. Richard Ludwig's team worked quietly. They tracked every transaction, cross-referenced every corporate filing, documented every timeline discrepancy. They found the forensic accountant Alvin had hired before Carmela died. They found the encrypted communications between Alvin and Sarah dating back 8 months before the funeral. They found text messages. When's she going to die? Soon. Doctors say weeks. And after? We move fast. Get her somewhere isolated. The messages were deleted. But deletion isn't the same as erasure. Not when someone knows where to look. Only subscribers see how patience becomes power. Don't get left behind. This is when everything shifts. Then something shifted. On a rainy Tuesday morning, 6 months and 1 day after Carmela Trudeau's death, a process server walked into Alvin's office. He was in a meeting, discussing expansion, pitching investors on a new development project that would, he promised, triple returns within 18 months. The process server waited. When the meeting ended, she handed Alvin an envelope. He opened it casually. Probably another contract, another formality. Then his face changed. Asset freezes, fraud investigations, marriage disputes, court date in 2 weeks. He read it twice. Then he called his attorney. Then he stormed out of the office, leaving his phone on the desk, his coat on the chair, his carefully constructed world cracking at the seams. Sarah called him 17 times. He didn't answer. Because Alvin finally understood something he should have known from the beginning. You can't outrun a trap you don't know you're in. And the trap had just closed. The courtroom filled fast. Journalists who'd heard whispers, investors nervous about their portfolios, financial analysts who'd started asking questions when Alvin's company's stock showed unusual volatility, and people who just wanted to watch someone fall. They got their show. Alvin's attorney tried to argue procedural delays, tried to claim improper filing, tried to spin the narrative into something defensible. The judge wasn't interested. Present your evidence of marriage dissolution. Alvin's attorney froze. The papers were filed, Your Honor. Were they signed? They were processed. By whom? A long pause. Were they signed by Mrs. Theiss? The attorney shuffled papers, looked at Alvin, looked back at the judge. No, Your Honor. Then there is no dissolution. The room erupted. Cameras flashed. Reporters scrambled for their phones. Investors started texting frantically. Alvin's company stock dropped 11% in the first hour, 15% by lunch. By market close, it had lost a quarter of its value. Board members called emergency meetings. Major investors pulled funding. Partners distanced themselves. Sarah disappeared from public view entirely. No social media, no statements, no trace. One day she was posting pictures of their life together. The next, her accounts went dark. Some say she moved overseas. Others claim she changed her name. A few believe she's still in California, just invisible. No one knows for sure. But everyone knows she's gone. Dolores entered the courtroom last. She wore black. Her hair was pulled back. Her expression was unreadable, calm, controlled, unrecognizable from the woman who'd been sent away 6 months earlier. She looked like Carmela, the same quiet power, the same invisible strength. The judge asked why she had waited so long to contest the separation. Dolores answered simply, "Because I wanted the truth documented." The room went silent. Then the ruling came down. Asset freeze, immediate effect. Pending full investigation into marital fraud, financial misconduct, and unlawful transfer of jointly held property. Alvin's attorney tried to argue, tried to spin, tried to delay. It didn't matter. The system had him now. And the system moves slowly, but it moves completely. Most people never recover from this kind of exposure. But we're not done yet, because Dolores wasn't interested in just stopping him. Alvin stood frozen as the judge continued. Every transaction made during the 6-month window would be reviewed. Every asset transfer scrutinized. Every corporate restructuring examined for intent to defraud. His empire, built on leverage, ambition, and other people's trust, was being dismantled in real time. But Dolores wasn't finished, because there was still one thing Alvin didn't understand. This wasn't revenge. This was preparation. And Carmela had prepared for everything. Dolores didn't destroy Alvin completely. Not yet. She let the system dismantle him piece by piece. The house sold at auction. The engagement dissolved quietly. The company restructured under new leadership that erased his name from everything that mattered. Alvin tried to rebuild. He gave interviews. He hired publicists. He claimed he'd been misled, manipulated, set up by a system that didn't understand the complexity of his situation. He framed himself as the victim. No one believed him, because the evidence was public now. The timeline, the deleted messages, the forensic accountant hired before Carmela died. The narrative he'd controlled so carefully had escaped his grip. Sarah never returned to California. Her family claimed she was traveling, finding herself, processing trauma. But people who knew better understood what really happened. She'd been discarded, just like Dolores. The only difference was that Dolores had a mother who'd prepared for it. Sarah didn't. Dolores moved into a quiet coastal estate, modest by billionaire standards, understated, invisible, just like Carmela. The house sat on a cliff overlooking the Pacific. No neighbors, no traffic, just wind and waves and space to think. She didn't flaunt wealth, didn't throw galas or join boards or make appearances. She lived the way Carmela had taught her, quietly, powerfully, invisibly. Because one thing Carmela had taught her, one thing Dolores finally understood, was that power isn't loud. It's patient. And it waits. People asked why she didn't finish him, why she let the system handle it instead of using her newfound resources to crush him completely. Dolores never answered, because they didn't understand. Destruction is easy. Control is art. Is mercy strength or strategy? Tell us what you think. And if you're still here without subscribing, why? Comment and let us know what we're missing. But there was something Dolores hadn't activated yet. Something Carmela had built into the structure so deeply that even Richard Ludwig only understood pieces of it. One clause, one contingency, one final safeguard. Clause 17, the one nobody talked about, because nobody knew what it did. Not fully. Richard explained it to Dolores over coffee in her new home, looking out over the Pacific. Your mother sealed this section. It executes automatically under specific conditions. What conditions? A second betrayal. A repeat pattern. Evidence that the subject hasn't learned, hasn't changed, won't stop. Dolores stared out at the water. Alvin was already making moves. Quiet ones. Rebuilding alliances. Contacting old investors. Whispering about comebacks and redemption arcs. He thought he'd learned his lesson. He hadn't. Because predators don't change. They just get quieter. If this were you, would you stop here? Or would you let the contingency play out? Comment below. We need to know where you stand. Dolores took a sip of coffee. How long until it activates? Richard checked his watch. Could be months. Could be days. Depends on him. And if he doesn't take the bait? Then nothing happens. The clause expires. He gets to walk away. Dolores nodded slowly. But if he does? Richard smiled. Then we'll find out what your mother really built. Carmela Trudeau's will contained 17 clauses. 16 had been executed. 1 remained dormant. Waiting. Not for time. For behavior. The 17th clause was different from the others. It wasn't triggered by dates or documents or legal filings. It was triggered by pattern recognition. Carmela had anticipated that Alvin wouldn't stop with one betrayal. That his nature, the core of who he was, would drive him to try again. To reach for something he thought he was owed. To believe he was smarter than the systems designed to catch him. And when he did, the contingency would activate automatically. Dolores asked what it would do. Richard smiled. I don't know. Your mother sealed that portion. It executes without oversight. No attorney review, no court approval, just activation. Dolores stared out at the water. The waves rolled in, constant, patient, inevitable, like everything Carmela had built. Alvin was already moving, quietly, carefully. He'd learned to avoid public mistakes, to keep his rebuilding efforts private, to work through intermediaries and shell companies that obscured his involvement. But he was still hunting, still looking for angles, still believing he could outmaneuver a woman who wasn't even alive anymore. 3 months after the courtroom collapse, Alvin contacted someone he shouldn't have, a former business partner of Carmela's, someone whose name appeared in the documents Richard had shown Dolores. The partner was actually a monitored entity, a tripwire built into the estate structure. Alvin didn't know. He sent an email, casual, exploratory, asking about old holdings, forgotten accounts, assets that might have slipped through the cracks during the estate settlement. The email never reached the partner. It reached something else. An automated system Carmela had designed. One that analyzed communication patterns, intent markers, behavioral indicators. The system flagged the email. Then it began executing. Richard received an alert at 3:47 a.m. He called Dolores. It's active. Dolores was awake. She'd been watching the ocean, unable to sleep, feeling something shift in the air. What happens now? I don't know. But we'll know soon. Within 48 hours, things started happening. Small things at first. Alvin's bank accounts showed irregularities. Nothing frozen, just wrong. Balances that didn't match. Transactions he didn't recognize. His attorney called asking about corporate filings that appeared under his name, filings he'd never authorized. His credit cards declined. His phone started receiving calls from numbers that didn't exist. And then the emails started. Messages from Carmela's address. Impossible. The account was closed. The domain expired. But the messages kept coming, each one containing a single sentence. You were warned. Alvin stopped sleeping. He hired security, changed phones, moved locations. Nothing stopped it. Because Clause 17 wasn't about destruction. It was about haunting. About making someone understand that some traps don't have exits. that some consequences don't have expiration dates, that some mothers protect their daughters even from the grave. Subscribe now, because this story isn't over. And if you're still not convinced, comment and tell us what would make you click that button. We're listening. Dolores never asked Richard what the clause was really doing. She didn't need to, because she understood something now. Carmela hadn't just left her money. She'd left her a legacy, a way of existing in the world that didn't require visibility or volume, just patience and preparation, and the absolute certainty that predators eventually reveal themselves. Justice came quietly. But revenge? Revenge was still waiting, still watching, still executing code written by a woman who'd loved her daughter enough to fight wars from beyond death. Alvin would never know peace, and Dolores would never explain why. She just lived, quietly, powerfully, invisibly, exactly the way her mother taught her.